portion of the regular meeting for May 20th, 2020, and we are back in session at 7:07. We had some items that needed to be discussed in camera, and a couple of issues arising from the in-camera discussion need some motions. So at this time, we're looking for a motion to rise and report.
Your Worship, I would make that motion, please, to rise and report.
We have a motion to rise and report. All in favor? And I see the three councillors at home are in favor too, so that motion is passed. And
Your Worship?
So the issue we're discussing is the Strathmore Municipal Building, but it's actually the Farmers Market paving, Farmers Market parking lot. So, Councillor Peterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So in front of us, we have a report from Michael Stamhus on our municipal building. And so I would move, Your Worship, that the attached spreadsheets presented by Mr. Stamhus be made available for public review.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor to accept the updated spreadsheet for the financials for the Strathmore Municipal Building. And for the people watching at home, that's a motion so that we can have absolute truthfulness and clarity and transparency on the project. So these will be available to the public should the motion pass. So we have that motion on the floor. Is all of council clear on what's on the floor now? I think everyone is. Seeing that, all in favor? And councillors at home, we have three councillors in favor at home as well. Thank you. So the motion carries. And now that report can be made public for all the residents to see. Did we want to discuss, Councillor Montgomery, did you want to discuss that? Oh, we need to have that added as an agenda item, don't we? No. Okay, sorry. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Worship. Just, I guess, to give anybody that might be watching this some context, what we were just, I think I'm probably on side to say that we discussed different specs for the paving of the area surrounding the new municipal building.
Point of order?
Yeah.
I think the process, Your Worship, would be for the motion to be made and then any editorial comments or questions could be made.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Montgomery, we would need a motion on the floor, and then we can
Sure.
we have to keep in mind that we also don't discuss things that were in camera as well. So we have to be very careful how we frame the discussion. So are you ready to put a motion on the floor?
Right. Yeah, sure. So I will make a motion that the town get a second opinion from a local or, let's say regionally based engineering company that specializes in road and highway construction to review the new specs that were proposed to us.
Okay, and did you want to speak to that motion?
Well, I'm not sure what I can say, I guess. I feel like I'm on side to say that we were presented with different specs than what we were originally, shown or let's say we're originally going to go with. And so my motion has to do with just getting a second opinion on the new specs to ensure that they do kind of meet the standards of what this area requires construction wise, just so that whatever we're going to be saving is not going to be outweighed in the future by whatever repair costs we might have to outlay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Peterson.
Just a point of information, Your Worship, because the report that we have in front of us is now public, Councillor Montgomery is free to speak to anything that's in that report summary.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
She said since the financial report has all been released concerning the Strathmore Municipal Building and its pieces, that you would be free to discuss things.
Okay, thank you.
So for clarity and transparency for the people at home, our project heads have had discussions with Clifton Engineering concerning the asphalt and paving for the farmers market parking lot. Councillor Montgomery is requesting that another engineer be consulted as far as getting a second opinion on the results that were presented to us.
Well, your worship. So I was just speaking with Mr. Roycroft, and he was talking about how they have in fact got somebody to kind of review the new specs, and so I would just like Mr. Roycroft to, I guess, maybe expand on that, and then I did have a question as well regarding that, and so it's possible that my motion might be satisfied with what Mr. Roycroft is going to be talking about.
Okay, we have Ryan coming to the microphone to speak to the concept of Clifton Engineering discussing and presenting and working through the specs for the farmers market paving on the farmers market parking lot. So, Mr. Roycroft.
Thank you, Worship. So just to provide a little bit of background for everyone, as the team has reviewed specs and designs for this, oh, perfect, yep, talk close to it. As the team has reviewed specs and designs for this project, we've taken the approach of questioning everything and looking for opportunities to reduce costs or to find more value. One of the instances brought up was to do a slightly different parking lot spec than had been originally proposed. Rather than going with and the report will talk about it, I'm going to say, and I am older than I look, 19 inches of asphalt, or 19 inches of sub-base, 4 inches of base, and then 4 inches of asphalt. And I'm hoping I'm doing this from memory. Instead, we proposed going with a process of thinner sub-base, thinner base, and thinner asphalt. However, by scarifying the process or the grade first, the intent there is typically you go with a really thick base in order to provide a degree of compaction enough so that if there are soft spots under the parking lot, that the sheer weight of the base pushes it down and flattens you out. It's, the principle of, oh goodness, putting something really heavy on something you're trying to drain to force the water out, essentially. The approach of scarifying it instead would essentially lift off the native material, plop it back down, and shake it up to accomplish the same thing without using as much material. The effect of that was to find some cost savings, which then the project team were recommending that be plugged back into the project to pave the asphalt parking lot. So staff proposed this to the engineering team, and ultimately PCL and Consite came back with a proposal that would meet most of the spec staff recommended, with some recommendations of their own that we would use then for the project. At this time, though, what might be the way to do it is prior to approving this, that we get the formal design and we can present that to council. Right now, because we are bringing matters to council so quickly and so very much on the minute, these were discussions that were being held Friday, I guess, and we're bringing them to council today. So I think the suggestion staff may have to council here is that we don't need to make the decision on this week, that we table the paving matter, bring it back to council with a full design next week for a formal vote. The staff recommendation.
Okay, councillors at home, did you hear that as far as the recommendation is to table until the first meeting in June?
We'll be all right. Yeah.
Oh, we have a motion on the floor. So then we would have to decide if that motion is going to, I guess you'd have to decide and vote whether you're going to support that motion, and then we would table it to table that issue till the first meeting in June. My question to Mr. Roycroft while we have him at the front is, with you folks doing that and getting another report to us, will there be more costs? Like, are you consulting another engineer then as far as information?
Your worship, staff recommendation would be that we have Clifton provide the engineered design to council. So we need that regardless. The only reason we get provided here is, as I say, our commitment to council was to bring very much matters as quickly as possible to you. So,
okay, thank you. And just for clarification for people watching or for councillors who are at home, sometimes it's a little confusing when you see things presented in the motion and parliamentary procedure. In order for this to be tabled, we may have to then defeat the motion. Is that correct in that, Jennifer? No, withdraw the motion. Jason, are you prepared to withdraw the motion? Councillor Montgomery?
I am. If Mr. Roycroft thinks that the motion wouldn't, I guess, wouldn't serve to his purpose of consulting Clifton and then producing that those engineering specs.
Your worship, ultimately, what we want to present to council is whatever information you need to make a decision that you are comfortable with. So if council feels that the engineered design from Clifton is enough to make that decision, then I don't think we need that motion anymore. If council wants additional information, then it's ultimately up to you. What's important to us is that council feels comfortable making the decision being posed.
Thank you, Mr. Roycroft. So, Councillor Montgomery, then, are you?
Yeah, so I'm satisfied with Mr. Roycroft providing information to us. So I'm willing to withdraw my motion then.
Okay, thank
you. Or I will withdraw my motion.
And again, if you're watching at home, Councillor Montgomery is withdrawing his motion, and that will give us 2 weeks to get all the information we need to make the best decision possible concerning the farmers market paving of the parking lot. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Brings us to, we have no.
Your worship, I believe, if I understand what Councillor Montgomery had said, that he no longer wishes to make that motion. However, rather than voting on the motion regarding the parking lot paving, that will just be, was that motion made?
Jennifer, let me just ask Jennifer, do we need a motion then to direct administration to bring a report to us on the first council meeting in June?
Yes, Your Worship, that would be most appropriate.
Thank you. Is anyone prepared to make that motion?
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. We have a motion on the floor to direct administration to bring us an updated report concerning the farmers market parking lot and the possible paving of it. So that's the motion that's on the floor. Any discussion on that motion?
Your worship, if we could just get the motion to be more general, just because it's not just the farmers market parking lot, it's the whole kind of area surrounding there. So it's the main parking lot as well, and then plus the road that goes in there.
Oh, so you're talking about the access road as well as that parking lot?
Yeah, like so the road that's going to run behind the building to that farmers market parking lot, and then as well as the main parking lot as well as is in part of this discussion.
Are you prepared to?
I just have a question. So is that consistent with the report from Mr. Stamhus?
Your Worship, the question posed in the report from Mr. Stamhus was if we should pave the farmers market parking lot. However,
but now Councillor Montgomery is suggesting something else be added. I'm not okay with that, and because I think we need to stick to the actual report that's in front of us, and so I'm not okay with that.
Well, if I could speak to that again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I am under the impression that the report talked about the paving of the parking lot, the road, and then the farmers market parking lot as well, and the specs being changed for all of those areas.
Your Worship,
Mr. Roycroft.
I think maybe I can propose an avenue that would address the concerns raised by both councillors. I think Councillor Peterson, if you're comfortable, the report proposes using the savings found by an alternative spec to use those pavings to make paving the staff parking lot cost neutral. So I think It may be appropriate then that council ask for a design of those alternative solutions to provide confidence that the savings can be plugged into paving the staff parking lot. I think that keeps us in the lines.
So I just have a follow-up question, Your Worship. So I'm looking at the report, at the now public report, that speaks to the access for the road, for the access road on the east side of the building, and on the farmers market parking lot. But the proposed motion regarding the build was just for the farmers market parking lot. Is that an oversight in the report, do you think? Or is it something that was going to be dealt with separately? And I know I'm being very picky about this, but it might help us to avoid a lot of back and forth and wasting of time that has plagued this project, and I just want to know before we leave it here.
Certainly, Your Worship. So I don't think it was, we always walk a tight rope here as we bring these matters to council, because council traditionally isn't the approving body on things such as engineering specs. So the report wasn't necessarily asking council's opinion on engineering specs. It wasn't written with that in mind. What it was written in mind with is to ask the opinion of council on what to do with some of the cost savings associated with changing those specifications. And we brought this as a question to council specifically because the farmers market parking lot is a very visible part of the project and has a lot of, we'll say, public components. This is an item on, like, say, changing the spec of, you know, the size of pipe underground going to the facility. That's traditionally done at an administrative level. Because this is such a visible item, the project team really felt it valuable to consult council with it. And this is, again, when we switched teams, our commitment to council was that we would engage council to make the really meaningful decisions.
So am I correct in assuming then that the report should speak to the parking lot, the access road, and the farmers market parking lot? That if it's approved to bring back at the first meeting in June, it would deal with those three areas.
I think if council wishes to at least see the new design, trying to figure this out, as Councillor Pearson says, in a way to avoid a lot of back and forth, maybe it is most appropriate that council ask staff to present the design for the site paving structure to council and keep it neutral at that level.
So Councillor Peterson, would you be comfortable withdrawing that motion and making a new one concerning Mr. Roycroft's comments?
I guess I have one further question to that. I'm not opposed to Your Worship. My further comment is just regarding all of this. In Mr. Stamhu's report, just for clarity, he said that Clifton Engineering had approved this. Relevant to Councillor Montgomery's concerns that we have not had a regional engineering firm confirm the wisdom of this process, is Clifton Engineering a regional provider?
Your Worship, Clifton's a large company, but we deal with their Calgary office, so they are regional, local, whatever we want to call that.
So I guess my consideration is that I don't see the purpose, and so I would withdraw that motion, and I have another motion prepared, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you.
So my motion, Your Worship, is that the farmers market parking lot and the access roads be finished with asphalt surfacing according to the specifications laid out in the report submitted and clarified by Clifton Engineering.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Discussion on the motion? Any councillors at home? Councillor Montgomery?
Yeah, and this is what my previous motion spoke to, I guess, and that is that, we have, and Mr. Roycroft, prior to, I guess, the public part of the meeting starting, was mentioning that, yeah, we have had Clifton, which is a more regionally based company, take a look at it, and that's why I am satisfied with Mr. Roycroft saying that Clifton has taken a look at it. Because I just want to make sure that like I'm all for saving money, of course, but as I said before, I want to make sure that we're not saving money in the near term just to have to spend extra money in the future. And so I'm for I'm just trying to do my due diligence here, basically. So if Mr. Roycroft would like to bring the engineering details to a future meeting, I would certainly appreciate it. I withdrew my motion because I didn't think that it was absolutely necessary. I'm satisfied that that Mr. Roycroft says that Clifton has taken a look at it and has signed off on it. So that's I'm satisfied with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Peterson.
Your Worship, in response to Councillor Montgomery, I'd be prepared to amend the end of that motion to ask to add to direct administration to bring the report of Clifton Engineering.
Okay, thank you. So we have an amended motion on the floor. Are all the councillors comfortable with that? Councillor Bauer?
Is it possible to reread the entire motion, please, Your Worship?
Councillor Peterson can do that.
I move that the farmers market parking lot and the access roads be finished with asphalt surfacing according to the specifications laid out in the report submitted by Mr. Stamhus and supported by Clifton Engineering, and that administration be directed to bring back the Clifton Engineering report to council at a future date for information.
Thank you. We have that motion on the floor. There was an amendment and it's been reread to council. So any other discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Oh, okay. So we're all in favor and the motion carries then. Thank you very much, Mr. Roycroft. Thank you, council. Councillors at home, thank you very much.
Your Worship, if I may, I just want to make one comment for clarification as well. The town employs engineering staff to review drawings, to comment on it, and to lead the design. However, any design that actually requires a stamp and seal, so buildings, parking lots, that sort of thing, are always reviewed by a third party. That's the stamp, that's the insurance that comes with it. So any design recommendations made by our team are always going to be taken through that third party engineer. So there's at least that technical review. That doesn't necessarily extend to some other aspects, but anything that gets that stamp and seal is always going through that third party, Clifton or our structural engineers or other parties. Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Roycroft. And that brings us to, we have no presentations or recognitions tonight. We have no delegations, and I don't believe we have a consent agenda. So that brings us to item 7, confirmation of minutes. 7.1, the adoption of the May 6, 2020 regular council meeting minutes.
Your Worship, I move that council adopt the May 6th, 2020 regular council meeting minutes as presented. And
are there any comments from council? The one I would make is on page 8 or page 5 of the reports. It's located on page 8 of 50. Underneath under item 10, Councillor Peterson, it should be Levy with a Y instead of Levi, unless we're buying jeans. It's a weak attempt at humor, but the Wednesday night. And if we could correct it in both those sentences, that would be great. So that would be the, I guess I'm not allowed to make an amendment, though, am I?
I'll accept that.
Okay, thank you.
Amazing.
Thanks. So we have an amended motion on the floor to accept those minutes as amended. Our motion to accept them as amended. I get that now. Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Councillor Montgomery, are you with us? Oh, you're in favor too. Okay, so thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Item 8, we have no tabled items. That brings us to item 9, items reports from administration. 9.1, Strathmore solar deployment follow-up, May 2020, and I believe Mr. Levasseur, I want to say your name right. That's pretty close. Council, before we get into this one, I do want to do a quick preamble. In the previous discussion on this, we took an awful lot of time, and there was a long period of time, a lot of questions. So procedurally, if we can try to watch our discussion, and I haven't really been pushing this too seriously, but we have a procedure as far as speaking up to a maximum of 2 times on an issue and try to limit the amount of time you're speaking on an issue. So hopefully that'll work. We have discussed this previously. So Mr. Levasseur, would you mind making your presentation?
Good evening. It's great to see everybody. Thank you for the Good evening. It's great to see everybody again after life in the fishbowl for a while. So thank you for the preamble, Your Worship. That does help. We have gone through this report. The report is in front of you. The last time I was in front of you with this, there was the requirement for additional clarification, both on the resolution that was tabled, as well as some questions that came from Councillor Montgomery. The interim portion, or the time between the last time I was here, we were able to address that. So there's an updated resolution, which I'll get to in just a bit. Additionally, there's been some communication with Councillor Montgomery to address some of the outstanding information he was looking for further transparency on, which ties it back to the very detailed financial information that's in front of you right now. Happy to answer any questions from Council or from Council Montgomery to further address that. And if there are no questions, what I'd like to do is retable the updated recommendation for the solar deployment.
Thank you very much. So thank you for your presentation. Are there questions from councillors? Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Worship. So my questions, as a lot of us know, were just kind of surrounding the financial side, and I just wanted to make sure that that it was making financial sense in the long run to go down this route. And Mr. Levasseur, he did satisfy most of my questions. The only questions that I had outstanding were just with regards to the market for recycled solar arrays, and oh, and then also I'm curious to know what like the schedule will be. Like I understand there's supposed to be little to no maintenance, but I'm under the impression that they do have to be cleaned occasionally. So I was just wondering like what the possible cost of cleaning, like, or schedule even would be of cleaning them, and then I was wondering just on the market, the current market for recycled solar arrays.
David, are you able to speak to those? Thank you.
So, Worship, great question from Councilor Montgomery, and he's been really engaged in the financial side, which is very much appreciated. It's happy to see somebody's looking at this and happy to look at this stuff. 2 points to that. So the communication and my interpretation of kind of the questions that were tabled at this point in time were, first of all, just around the cleaning and the maintenance associated with the panels themselves, and specifically the cleaning. So this question was put to the developers previously. The messaging that we got back is that the cleaning is actually not required. And the reason for that is because, well, twofold. There's typically enough rainfall that comes down, which gets rid of the dust and the debris that's on the panels themselves. The second reason is that if you look at I'll call it the efficiency degradation associated with the panels themselves, by applying a cleaning schedule to the panels themselves, what you'll find is that, and this is based on the research that I did today, Councillor Montgomery, given the short time that we had, but the reports and what I'm reading online here is that you're only seeing about a 1% improvement in efficiency as a result of a cleaning schedule. Therefore, it's not necessarily prudent, financially prudent anyways, to spend the money to basically set up a schedule and pay for those fees, which is why they weren't included to begin with. That said, to the extent that there is, we'll call it, there is debris or that they're dirty enough to rationalize some amount of, we'll call it, performance that we're not seeing, the operating and maintenance agreements that would accompany this deployment would include, for lack of a better word, health checks to make sure that the agreed to efficiencies associated with the panels themselves are being adhered to. So an example of that would be the cleaning that you're talking about. So to the point that there was degrees that was causing a large enough impact to the efficiencies of the panels, then the operator, the developer, would be responsible for cleaning that under the terms of the agreement. So that's on the cleaning front. The second part to the question, which was a lot funner to actually go through and research, was on the decommissioning side of things. And I don't want to understate kind of the importance of that. It's obviously an important consideration when you look at these panels. This question was also asked through the process by administration to the developer. What they said was, or what they communicated, is that, quite frankly, there's not a whole lot of, we'll call it, examples of specific decommissioning costs in Alberta and in Canada right now because of the recent momentum in solar. So you have to, understanding that these assets have, 25 to 30-year life, there isn't a lot of tangible examples that you can point to right now to say, here's exactly what the decommissioning costs were. But in the interest of ultimately addressing the question, what I then did is I looked across the border and looked into the United States, and there's actually a fair amount of research that you can do to look at that. One example of a decommissioning project, I want to put the disclaimer on it that this was a 5 megawatt system, right, or 5,000 kilowatt relative to our large 88 kilowatt system that we're proposing here. But that said, it's still representative of the costs that are associated with decommissioning one of these systems. The general costs associated with that are roughly 3.5 cents per watt. If you adjust that cost for the things that weren't applicable, so in that example there was telephone poles that had to be removed, there was landscaping costs that needed to be addressed. If you adjust the cost for non-applicable costs for this project, you're looking at $2,600 30 years from now. So once you adjust for inflation and you then adjust it for the time value of money, we're talking about roughly a $2,000 cost in the context of $80,000 worth of net benefit that this project brings to the town, which is laid out in the financials. So they were not included. There definitely will be some form of that. But to address the markets for materials, part of the discussion could also be targeted in the sense that we don't know what the price for power is going to be 30 years from now, right? So obviously there'd be implications around making assumptions and cost assumptions around materials that are tied to that system when we don't really know what the price of power would be 30 years from now. So I take your point, there's definitely a cost in there. The way I'm looking at this is that there's $80,000 worth of benefit, referencing the NMAX case that's in front of you. Will there be a decommissioning cost? Likely there will be. What will the market for those materials be 30 years from now? I can't comment on that at this point in time. But with the information that I'm seeing available to me right now, the cost associated with do so would still be below the threshold to put the town at risk of not having a financial validation or rationalization for moving forward with this project.
Thank you.
With that, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David. Does that address your concerns, Councilor Montgomery?
Yeah, that does go a long way actually to answer my questions. So I really appreciate you taking the time, David, to look into that, and I appreciate you giving me the answers as well.
Thank you. Are there questions from other councillors?
I have one more question if nobody else has one.
Any other questions from other councillors? I don't. Councillor Bauer?
Thank you, Worship. So I'm looking at the motion in front of us, and I'm wondering, David, if you could please just go over your rationale with going with the NMAX proposal versus the one from Skyfire so that we're completely transparent and we all understand that there will be additional costs. However, it's your opinion that that would be a better option to go forward with today than
Councillor
the
Bauer,
possibility.
could we just,
Yes.
the procedural thing, could we get a motion on the floor and then we can discuss it? Would you be prepared to make the motion to get it on the floor for discussion and David could address that?
Yes, let me just pull it up, please, Your Worship. Sorry, I'm trying to do these split screen stuff and it's, okay, I got it. I move that council direct administration to move forward with the solar deployment for the new town hall, subject to receiving grant funding.
Councillor Bauer, we have a little confusion.
I
David?
Yes.
apologize for interrupting. There's a small change that is required that was requested by a director of finance. That there was a slight difference with what was proposed by administration and then what ultimately made it through. So we just want to make sure we're being very clear to avoid the, we'll call it the confusion that we went through last time. If I may, is it okay if I read through the resolution to make sure that we're all aligned?
Sure.
So what the recommendation is from administration is that council direct administration to move forward with the solar deployment for the new town hall, subject to receiving the grant funding further described within this report, and for this project to be funded through the deferred financing plan offered by NMAX, which will require a borrowing bylaw.
Okay, Councillor Bauer, did you get that in order to make a motion?
I sure did.
Okay, thank you.
Your worship, I'm prepared to respond to Councillor Bauer's question as well. I think it's an important one.
Councillor Bauer, would you please make the motion then?
I move that council direct administration to move forward with the solar deployment for the new town hall, subject to receiving grant funding further described within this report, and for this project to be funded through the deferred financing plan offered by NMAX, which will require a borrowing bylaw.
Thank you for that motion. And now, David, you can speak to that.
Your worship, it's a great question in terms of the difference between how this was positioned in the request of council. The resulting resolution that came through the last time we were in front of you on solar really provided kind of, we were looking for council's discretion on what developer to go, because quite frankly, they were both equally beneficial. The follow-up conversation that resulted after that last presentation between Ryan Roycroft, the Director of Infrastructure, and our Director of Finance, there was a collaborative discussion. We had probably an hour-long discussion on it. And really what administration came back to is, in the interest of making sure we maintain the maximum financial flexibility in this market, we want to make sure that we minimize the upfront payment associated with this project. Now, we're sacrificing, we'll call it immaterial dollars on the back end, right, of this project in order to do so, because Skyfire's report, as detailed within the report, is slightly more beneficial to the town. But again, we're comfortable with the flexibility that provides through the NMAX contract. And as such, from the directors that I spoke with, their recommendation was to move forward with NMAX to provide the flexibility that I just described.
Thank you, David. Does that help, Councillor Bauer?
It does a little bit. However, I'm still concerned that the upfront costs, even with the grant, are still more cumulative to what Skyfire is proposing for us. And I understand from previous conversations with Mr. Lavasseur that Skyfire is a local company that perhaps we should take a serious consideration to supporting.
David? Sir?
Your worship, Councillor Bauer's question is absolutely accurate, and it's reflective of previous discussions. I am in support of both developers. I want to be very, very clear here. And the relationship that I've built with them, we've been working on this for 6 to 12 months here. Skyfire's offering is very, very compelling. The only difference, or the key difference, again, that I would point to is the necessity to delay the $78,000 that would be required as an upfront payment, which would come directly out of our bank account. We're just trading that to distribute over the next 15 years through the NMAX deferral plan. So again, I support the director's kind of positions in terms of protecting the town's balance sheet and providing the additional flexibility. And as such, I'll leave it there unless.
Thank you. Mr. Roycroft is going to also speak to that, Councillor Bauer.
Your Worship, I'll just expand slightly on what Mr. Lavasser said. It seems strange calling you that. It is the upfront cash model. Because this would have to be funded with cash, the only real pot council can draw from right now would be financial stability reserve. In let's say normal times, for want of a better word, that would be an easy one to draw from. Right now, with the uncertainty around COVID, around what that looks like, administration, myself and Mr. Teedy really think there's a real value that council keep that pot for flexibility's sake. I think the town is weathering this crisis as well as anyone, but you never know when it may be really valuable for council to maintain a good financial reserve. So the NMAX proposal doesn't drain that reserve and it maintains that flexibility. It's a little less compelling from a financial perspective. However, it keeps that option for council to draw those funds in case a more urgent need comes about. So that was the director's rationale here.
Thank you, Ryan. David?
Your Worship, the last point I'd add to Councillor Bauer's point is that one of the benefits that we looked at when we moved forward, again, we started with 8 projects, right? 8 viable, economically feasible solar projects. Those projects are still very much economically feasible given the grant funding that's available right now. So the last point that I'd like to make is that this is likely not the last solar deployment for the town. Obviously, the administration would be required further work on that. But the reality is that the next projects that we look at, Skyfire would be very much part of the discussion that we'd look in terms of validating and seeking out viability to see if those would be applicable at that time. And those discussions I've already had with Skyfire as well.
Thank you, David. Councillor Sobel?
Thank you. Considering, I almost hate to go down this road, but considering the fact that this is going on top of our building, is there any chance, and I don't know who to address this question to, if it's James or Ryan or anybody who knows what what the end result of our budgeting on our new building is going to be, is there a chance that these dollars could be found inside the building?
Your Worship, you know, this is actually something I've thought long and hard about, and even talked to Mr. Stamhuse about. Again, I feel like I'm the principal now talking to them. We are still carrying a $180,000 contingency on the building. It's just the administration's recommendation here, and it is a risk to begin drawing that down for this. And we want this to be a success. We want this to be something the town is proud of, and part of that is risk management, risk minimization here. So, you know, it is a viable option, but we discussed it and really strongly recommend against pulling those contingency dollars to fund this. It would take almost half of our remaining contingency, and that's a risk, and it's a risk that staff can't recommend at this time.
Thank you, Ryan. Councillor Bauer, does that help you?
It does, and I'd just like to offer a point of order, if I may. I believe that it would be prudent of me not to be part of the vote going forward. I believe that because my husband works for NMAX, that I shall recuse myself from the motion.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Bauer. Councillor Montgomery, you have one more question, I believe. Councillor Montgomery? Can you hear me?
Sorry. I probably sound better that way. My question, I do have a question, and then I have a question that resulted from Councillor Bauer's motion. And the first question I have is just to do with debt level. And since we would have to do a borrowing bylaw for the NMAX, I would presume that that will raise our debt level.
Your Worship, in response?
Yes.
So very specifically, there's two versions of debt level. There's the municipal prescribed way of calculating debt, and then there's the actual cash that comes out of the bank, which costs you interest charge right out of the gate, right? So the accounting interpretation of this deferred financing plan, although it looks and smells like a lease, right, would be caught under the debt obligation of that. But keep in mind that we're also bringing in revenues to offset those, or effective savings to offset those as well. Does that answer?
So I guess like where I'm going with this is I almost would prefer to make like if I was making a motion, I would make a motion to borrow the money and go with Skyfire. Would you recommend, if we were willing to borrow that money, would you recommend going that route, or recommend going against it? Either way.
David, did you want to answer that?
Your Worship, what I would respond to that with is that, again, practically we're talking about an $8,000 difference in terms of the benefit. The qualitative piece in terms of what company we deal with, I think we're in a strong position with NMAX, and we would be in a strong position with Skyfire as well. So the difference is negligible. I think in the context of Mr. Roycroft's commentary around the flexibility that the NMAX option provides, I would still kind of move forward and support the director's positions on this.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we do have a motion on the floor. So did you have another question or a comment?
Well, so this question has to, like, these questions have to do with the motion. I'm wondering if this is the best path forward, I guess, and I'm trying to deduce that. So, because I'm not suggesting, for instance, that I believe Mr. Roycroft was speaking about it would be unwise to draw off of our reserves, but I'm not suggesting we draw off the reserves. I would be suggesting that we draw off of borrowing, if we were. So, and I thought the difference was a difference between 78,000 and 109,000.
So you're saying the difference is far greater than what's being presented?
Well, no, that's what I'm wondering, because in our package, I believe it says, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe like NMAX was 109 for the capital cost, and then I think Skyfire was either 78 or 87.
Your Worship, if I may.
David, yep.
To address Councillor Montgomery's question specifically, the capital costs up front are different the way you just defined them. The trade-off is the amount of net cash flow that we receive over the life of the project, which explains the differences in the cumulative benefit to the project.
I see. Okay.
That's the difference.
Thank you. Councillor Sobel, I think, has a question.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I'm just a little bit confused. I'm hoping Councillor Bauer or someone else can help me. One of the reasons why there was some lean towards Skyfire, was that they're a local company. When we speak about local, are we talking Strathmore local?
If I could respond back, when Mr. Levasseur spoke to us earlier, he said that Skyfire came, I believe, to him via the Sustainability Committee. And so it was someone local who presented Skyfire as an alternative. And so that's how I came to the conclusion that it was local.
All right, just my information is that they're a Calgary company, as is NMAX. I just want to make sure that we're talking we're not getting a message out there that's inaccurate. Sky
Thank
Fire,
you.
they may have people that work for them that live in the area, but yeah, thank you. As does NMAX, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have a motion on the floor, and I guess I can call the motion. We've had a lot of speaking. Councillor Corbeil, did you have any comments?
I think I'm good. Everything that I've read and everything else, I'm fine with what's been presented.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. With one abstention due to comments. And thank you very much for that, Councillor Bauer. So thank you, David, for your report and everything. Councillors, again, thank you for your work on this. That brings us to item 9.2, 2020 Seniors Week declaration for the Bob and Denise Week. Tracy, welcome. Tracy Simpson is here. Thank you to speak to this.
Thank you, Your Worship. So before you is a proclamation for declaring the week of June 1st to June 7th as Seniors Week here in Alberta. And it's for Council's consideration.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Councillor Peterson?
Well, Your Worship, after that priceless introduction, I can't help but ask for your forbearance as I make this motion that Council declare June 1st to 7th, 2020 Seniors Week. And I'd like to speak to the motion, Your Worship. So in the last little while, I've heard many poignant comments regarding the horror happening in long-term care and residential care homes across our country. And I don't think that our country has ever seen the likes of a pandemic like this as the rest of the world. But the impact that it's had on seniors particularly makes this week even more important than other weeks in past years. And in the midst of this horrific crisis, in all that's happened in every residential long-term care home across this country, the word that most comes to my mind is that this might have been preventable. And one of the things that I wanted to say to the seniors of our community is that I will in the very near future be asking support from my council and my fellow AUMA counterparts to support a resolution to AUMA to call on our provincial government to urge our federal government to bring all such residences across our country into the healthcare system under the Canada Health Act. I won't belabor this at this point, but I just want to say to all seniors that your council is invested in you as you have been in our communities. I want to thank you for what you've given to our community these many years. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peterson. Any other comments from councillors? Seeing none, all in favor? Oh, Councillor Sobel, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no bell to ring. And I appreciate those comments, Councillor Peterson, and certainly support those. On a less serious note, and one with a little bit more brevity, the only calls that I've received in regards to this week is the tradition in the past to having free shredding for seniors, and I'm wondering if there's been any discussion as to whether or not that might even be a possibility this year.
Thank you, Councillor Sobel. So the majority of our Senior Week activities have been cancelled as they don't fit within the current restrictions set out by the province. We are reviewing a few of them, and shredded is on the list. So I can't confirm that it's going to happen yet, but it hasn't been formally axed. We're also going to be working on some stronger communication messages and maybe some activities people can do at home to celebrate Seniors Week as we can't gather this year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from councillors? Seeing none, all in favor? Councillor Bauer? I don't see you.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, okay, so thank you. That motion has carried. And that brings us to 9.3, business license funding for Chamber of Commerce. And Tracy Simpson is speaking to this again.
Thank you, Your Worship. Following up from our presentation a couple weeks ago to Council regarding the Chamber of Commerce Business License Grant, administration went back and reviewed the current list of businesses who have registered for licenses in 2020, as well as a list of memberships provided by the Chamber. Comparing those two lists, it is our recommendation that Council provide the Chamber with a $3,000 annual operating grant based on the 30 businesses that were on both lists.
Thank you for that report. Is any councillor prepared to make a motion? Oh, we have a question first. Councillor Peterson?
I have a question for clarification to Legislative Services or Administration. If you have I have a son who's just taken out a business license in Strathmore, does that create a conflict in this case? Yeah, like he's taken out a business license, so this would advantage him, but I don't know if it's a conflict.
Your Worship, it benefits all of the businesses in Strathmore, not just specifically yours.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you as well to Councillor Peterson for checking on that clarification. Is someone prepared to make a motion? Melanie, Deputy Mayor Corbeil.
Thank you, Worship. I move the council approve the 2020 Chamber of Commerce grant in the amount of $3,000 to be funded from the Community Improvement Program.
Thank you for that motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. And for the councillors at home, you folks are a smaller square now, so it's sometimes hard for me to see if what your vote was or if you want to speak. So please bear with me a little longer. That brings us to item 10, committee reports. 10.1, reports from committees from councillors from committees on which they sit. Councillor Peterson?
Your Worship, I submitted a brief report on Marigold Library, but I think there is very little new, but it can be included in our minutes previous. The only thing that I would have to add, and I apologize to Councillor Bauer because I didn't know about this until just very recently, but a month ago, with help from our Director of Emergency Services and from Ms. Simpson and from the Executive Director of the Strathmore Overnight Shelter, I applied for a grant for additional assistance for staffing, for all-day staffing for the overnight shelter until the COVID crisis was relaxed, so that we could do a better job of assisting our clientele. And we did receive the grant. It hasn't been finalized yet because we have some paperwork to do, but we have been notified that we have received additional funding that will really help see the Strathmore Overnight Shelter through this immediate crisis and get us through the summer. And so I'm very grateful to all the support that we receive from the town and from administration to that end, and very grateful to them.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Any other reports from Councillor Bauer? Sorry.
Oh, well, I'm just so thrilled, Councillor Peterson. I mean, having the ability to be able to pay for staff during the day will just make the lives of so many of our homeless, our current clients within our homeless shelter, our overnight shelter, so much better, because they have come to me numerous times saying that with the current crisis and pandemic and the restrictions within restaurants and just outdoor facilities, they have no place to go. And a lot of them are either walking, or they're in a position where they're out in the elements. And let's face it, we don't have the greatest of weather all the time here, including our wind and rain and unpredictability. So I'm really thankful to Councillor Peterson for taking the initiative and applying for the grant and getting everything in. And then, of course, congratulations on getting it approved. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Councillor Bauer always asks at this time, she always puts out a call for volunteers. So because of the COVID crisis, the overnight shelter is down significantly in volunteers. So I just always echo Councillor Bauer's reaching out to the community that if anybody wants to volunteer, there will always be space found for them. I also want to, in addition to the town staff and that have been so helpful to the overnight shelter, I also want to acknowledge other groups in the community that contributed to this. Prospect Employment Services will offer on-site services digitally to the clients at the shelter, as will the library, Marigold as well. Also, the FCSS has just been brilliant in the work that they've been doing to take people whose lives at some of the very worst times of their lives and mitigate those circumstances into making them better. So we've had this circle of support that's come through this community, which is really, really wonderful, and it speaks to the heart and soul of this community. I'm really proud of what they've accomplished. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Any other reports from councillors? And I believe we need a motion to accept the council reports. Councillor Bauer?
I move to accept the committee reports.
Thank you very much. We have a motion on the floor to accept those committee reports. All in favor? And the motion is carried. I believe we have no items directly related to council. That brings us to item 12, bylaws. 12.1, bylaw 20-02, telecommunication antenna. And Mr. Roycroft is speaking to this.
Thank you, Your Worship. In the interest of time, and because Council's already seen this, I'll keep my remarks brief. So in early March of this year, which seems so long ago somehow, our staff brought to Council Committee of the Whole a discussion on a potential telecommunications bylaw for the town of Strathmore. So the intent of this bylaw, right now the town doesn't regulate cell phone towers and those forms of antennas in town. We leave that to the federal government. Ultimately, the federal government is the main regulatory body here. However, they do make allowances for requiring that proposals hew to municipal standards as well. So staff have surveyed other municipalities and put together a proposed land use bylaw amendment that is broadly in keeping with what other municipalities do. That's just intended to regulate, especially where the really big cell towers are going, to make sure they aren't interfering with residential amenities, public safety, view corridors, that sort of thing. The bylaw would also allow the municipality to charge a fee. So this fee would be levied on the operator or on the installer of the tower, which is typically going to be in this region, TELUS, Rogers, Bell, those sorts of entities that are erecting these. So staff recommendation here is that the bylaw be given first reading. It is a land use bylaw amendment, so it does have to go to public hearing prior to second and third reading. So yeah, staff recommendation here is that council give first reading to bylaw 2002 and that council hold and advertise a public hearing on July 8th.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roycroft. And council, are you prepared to make a motion? Deputy Mayor Corbeil.
Thank you, Worship. I move the council give first reading to bylaw number 20-02, telecommunications antenna bylaw.
Thank you for the motion. Now that we have a motion on the floor, is there any discussion on that motion? No discussion, sorry. Jennifer? Can we ask questions for clarification if there's a motion? Yes. Councillor Peterson.
So my question relates to page 26 of our agenda, or page 4 of this report. And it is the second last paragraph before the title public circulation that says, note that in cases where the town does not support a proposal cannot prevent a proponent from ultimately gaining permission from Industry Canada to install a telecommunication antenna structure, even if it contravenes the town's telecommunication protocols, as the decision is ultimately that of the minister. So my question, my clarification, so this is a federal ministry.
Your worship, that's correct. The telecommunications are regulated by the federal ministry.
Okay, that is a very annoying point, but we'll leave it for a future date. Thank you.
Thank you,
for your
Councillor
work.
Peterson. We have a motion on the floor. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Councillor Sobel.
This on, I move that council hold a public hearing for bylaw number 20-02 telecommunications antenna bylaw on July the 8th, 2020.
Thank you for that motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. And that brings us 12.2, bylaw 20-13, Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment, which is on page 45 of your agenda. And Jennifer, you are speaking to that. You have your own mic. Good.
I do. Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, Council has actually requested administration to bring forward an amendment to their Code of Conduct, Bylaw 1908. The recommended amendment was that a requirement be added that each councillor sign an oath at the time that they are giving their oath of office, indicating that they have read and understood the Council Code of Conduct Bylaw. Also, there was a recommendation to bring forward, to sign the oath during the time councillors are sworn in. So attached to this report is Bylaw 2013 with those recommended amendments, and administration is requesting that council give all 3 readings.
And do we have any questions from councillors? I don't see any. Deputy Mayor Corbeil?
I'm ready for the first motion. I move that council give first reading to bylaw number 20-13, Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment Bylaw.
Thank you for that motion. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried.
Go with the motion, Your Worship.
Councillor Sobel?
I'd move the council give second reading to bylaw number 20-13, Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment Bylaw.
Thank you. And on bylaws, can we discuss? Okay, so we have a motion for second reading. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? And the motion is carried. Councillor Montgomery, did you wave?
Yeah, I can do it. I just have to switch screens here.
Cool there.
I will move the council give unanimous consent to a third and final reading of bylaw number 20-13, Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment Bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Sorry I put you on the spot. I just saw a flash of movement. All in favor? And that motion is carried. Councillor Peterson?
Your Worship, I would move that council give third and final reading to bylaw number 20-13, Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Amendment Bylaw.
Thank you. We have a motion for third and final reading. All in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Brings us to item 13, urgent business. I don't believe we have urgent business. Question. I'm like a teacher. Item 14, questions between councillors and or council statements. Anything from the council? Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you, Worship. So I just wanted to talk briefly about this past week. The town, or within the town, there was the first Strathmore spring cleaning, and I was very impressed with the response from people in the community who came out throughout last week and took the time to clean up all over town. And it was very nice to see the number of people that were out volunteering and looking to make the community better. And as well, we any litter that we picked up will save in tax dollars. So I just wanted to thank everybody that came out and congratulate the people that were successful in finding a voucher. And yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to anybody in council who participated as well.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. And thank you for your work in getting this organized, and for you and your family, your kids, to get so involved in helping to clean up the town. We really appreciate your efforts. Thank you. Any other comments from councillors? Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 15, administrative inquiries. 15.1, inquiry response concerning recreation passes. Jennifer.
Your Worship, the response is there for council's information.
All right,
If there are
thank
any
you.
questions.
Any questions concerning that administrative inquiry? Councillor Montgomery, did you waive?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I think, yeah, and so the nature of this this administrative inquiry was just to look into the idea of providing some sort of free passes to residents in order to kind of make up for what we already subsidized the recreation, and as well to act as like basically a loss leader in order to get more people to use the facilities. So, and I appreciate administration's work on looking at some different ways to attract some new users, and I would be interested, and I guess I can pursue this with another administrative inquiry if that's the way to go. I would be interested just to have a look at the potential benefits of maybe like a broader provision of passes similar to what I had kind of mentioned before. But again, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Tracy is also here to add.
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration would, at this time, then request council to make a motion directing administration to do a more thorough research into any of the aspects of the admin inquiry, so we can provide, or so we can allocate staff time appropriately.
Councillor Montgomery, would you be ready then to make a motion?
What I'll do is I'll put together, let's say, a more specific motion, and then I'll do it as a notice of motion or something like that in the future.
Okay, thank you. That would
Thank
be
you.
great. So we have no other items tonight?
No.
Oh, you do?
Yes,
Oh,
Your Worship, we
Deborah.
have 4 administrative inquiries.
Oh, good.
The first one is from Deputy Mayor Corbio. It's concerning joint use partnership agreement. What kind of joint use partnership agreement could the town have with Golden Hills? What is in place right now, and if any, should this be updated, and how often should this be revisited? The second one from Deputy Mayor Corbio is she would like administration to look into the pros and cons of centralized booking. The next one is from Councillor Montgomery. Can administration please report on the scheduling of our full-time firefighters relative to the volume of calls that they respond to, so that we can ensure they are being scheduled at the optimal time to reduce necessary usage of volunteer resources? And the last one is from Councillor Montgomery. Can administration look into installing signage along the major roadways such as Highway 817 to let people know of the fines for littering? And that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Councillor Peterson.
I have a question, Your Worship. I think administration inquiry. So if you have an administrative inquiry that may incidentally cross into operation or into operations, would it then just be incumbent on administration to say that's an operational issue, or should it be incumbent on council to say that maybe was not okay? Like I stand to be corrected. And on the 817 one, I think that's a query to Alberta Transportation too, or maybe something that we could.
They are responsible for 817. That's true. As far as your comment about an administrative inquiry that may venture into operations, Mr. Thackeray, can you add any insight on that? He's just sanitizing.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the question about the admin inquiry from Councillor Montgomery, if it would be, I'd like to take a look at the admin inquiry, and I'd like to, with permission, I would like to get some more background from Councillor Montgomery before I render a decision. Back to council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that is all the administrative inquiries,
Your
Councillor
Worship,
Sobel?
yeah, just to comment on that also. This isn't meant to stop a question. It's just it's a matter of asking the question in the proper format, and a question like that which delves into the operations of the fire department. I would tend to suggest that this go by way of motion rather than admin inquiry. It's just my personal
So are you
opinion,
suggesting
but I'll certainly leave this with CAO.
a notice of motion?
Well, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Thackeray?
If I may, I'd like to see I'd like to see what the motion is, or sorry, the admin inquiry is, and then I could provide some feedback back to council.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That brings us to the end of the meeting. And the only thing we need is
I'd move adjournment, Your Worship.
That's what I'm looking for. We have a motion to adjourn from Councillor Sobel. Councillor Peterson at 8:23. You've all heard that motion, which confused me. All in favor? And we are adjourned at 8:23. And thank you to the public for watching. You're brave people.